What are you doing here?
Studying. I'm a law student.
Stand up. You're leaving.
Am I under arrest for studying?
My tax dollars aren't training people like you to argue with me.
I'm just trying to study, sir.
Hands behind your back, now.
Franklin Williams was a 25-year-old law student at Georgetown University, sitting in the law library on a Wednesday afternoon in October, surrounded by constitutional law textbooks, preparing for his midterm exam. His laptop was recording his study session, a technique he and his study group used to review their focus and efficiency later. The law library had security cameras throughout, installed after rare book thefts in 2019. And Officer Sean Anderson's body camera was activated and recording when he walked up to Franklin's table. Anderson had responded to a call about an unattended bag near the study tables. By the time he arrived, the bag's owner, Franklin, was sitting right there with his backpack beside him, studying. The call should have been cleared. It wasn't. At 4:34 p.m., Anderson walked up to Franklin's table and asked what he was doing there. Franklin looked up from his constitutional law textbook and explained he was a law student studying for an exam. Anderson told him to stand up and leave. When Franklin asked if he was being arrested, Anderson said, "My tax dollars aren't training people like you to argue with me." Franklin was handcuffed, removed from the library, and charged with trespassing and disorderly conduct for studying in a law library while black. Before we go further, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. And let me know in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? We love seeing where you're tuning in from. What Officer Anderson didn't know was that 3 cameras had recorded everything. And what Anderson really didn't know was that this time, the evidence wouldn't disappear. That this time, a professor was watching. That this time, 7 other students were ready to testify. Franklin wasn't Anderson's first victim, but he would be Anderson's last. Franklin Williams grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, the oldest of 3 children. His mother was a high school teacher, his father worked for the Postal Service, and his uncle, Alton Williams, was an FBI agent who specialized in civil rights violations, investigating police departments, hate crimes, and systemic discrimination. When Franklin was 16, Uncle Alton sat him down and had a conversation that would save his life 8 years later. "If a cop ever stops you," Alton said, "here's what you do. Stay calm. Keep your hands where they can see them. Don't argue. Don't resist. State clearly that you don't consent to any search. And if they ask you questions, you can ask if you're being detained. If they say yes, ask what crime they suspect you of. Document everything you can. And Franklin, let them talk. Let them incriminate themselves. The more they talk, the more evidence you have." Franklin listened. He took notes. And 8 years later, sitting in a law library at Georgetown University, he would follow every single instruction his uncle had given him. Franklin had graduated from the University of Maryland with a degree in political science in 2021. He'd scored in the 92nd percentile on the LSAT. Georgetown Law had accepted him with a partial merit scholarship. By October 2024, he was in his second year, ranked in the top 15% of his class, and studying for his constitutional law midterm, an exam on the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. The irony of what was about to happen would not be lost on anyone. On Wednesday, October 15th, 2024, Franklin arrived at the Georgetown Law Library at 2 p.m. He set up at his usual table in the main reading room, a long oak table near the windows with a good view of the campus. He pulled out his constitutional law casebook, his laptop, a yellow highlighter, and his legal notepad covered in handwritten notes. Before he started studying, Franklin opened OBS, Open Broadcaster Software, a free program he and his study group had been using all semester. The technique was simple. Record yourself studying for 90 minutes, then watch the playback at 2 times speed to see if you were actually focused or just staring at pages while your mind wandered. It was a brutal but effective way to improve concentration. Franklin hit record. His laptop's webcam began capturing everything in front of him: his face, his hands, his books, and the study area beyond. He didn't think about it again. He just started studying. At 4:15 p.m., Franklin's phone buzzed. A text from his study group. "Taking a break? Coffee in 20?" Franklin texted back, "Yeah, meet you at 4:40. He stood up, grabbed his water bottle, and walked to the bathroom, leaving his backpack on the chair beside his table. He was gone for 3 minutes. When Franklin returned at 4:18 p.m., his backpack was exactly where he'd left it. He sat down, took a sip of water, and went back to reading about Terry versus Ohio and reasonable suspicion standards. At 4:32 p.m., a Georgetown University police patrol car pulled up outside the law library. Officer Sean Anderson, responding to a call logged at 4:16 p.m., grabbed his radio and walked toward the entrance. The call had come from a student worker at the library's front desk, a freshman working her second shift, who had been told during training to report unattended bags as a security precaution. She'd seen Franklin's backpack sitting alone at the table while he was in the bathroom and, trying to follow protocol, had called campus police to report it. By the time Anderson arrived, Franklin had been back at his table for 14 minutes. The unattended bag was sitting right next to its owner, who was clearly studying. A reasonable officer would have checked with the front desk, confirmed the bag's owner had returned, and cleared the call. Anderson did not do that. Anderson walked into the library at 4:34 p.m. His body camera activated automatically when he exited his patrol car, a department policy requiring all officers to record any call response. The camera's blue LED indicator light was visible on his chest, recording everything. Anderson scanned the main reading room. He saw a black male in a gray hoodie sitting at a table with books and a laptop. Anderson walked directly toward him. Franklin was mid-sentence in a Supreme Court opinion when he heard heavy footsteps on the library carpet. He looked up and saw a campus police officer standing at his table. "What are you doing here?" Anderson asked. His tone wasn't curious. It was accusatory. Franklin had been taught by his uncle to stay calm. "Studying," he said. "I'm a law student." Anderson looked at the books on the table, then back at Franklin. "Stand up. You need to leave." Franklin felt his heart rate spike. He remembered Uncle Alton's voice. "Stay calm. Hands visible. Document everything." "Am I being detained?" Franklin asked, keeping his voice even. Anderson's expression hardened. "Yeah, you're detained. Stand up." Franklin kept his hands flat on the table. "Can you tell me what I'm being detained for? I'm a student here. I'm just studying for my constitutional law exam." "I don't care what you're studying for," Anderson said, his voice getting louder. Several students at nearby tables turned to look. "You're coming with me." Franklin glanced at his laptop. The red recording light was still on. The camera was still recording. He looked back at Anderson. "Officer, with all respect, I'm a registered student at this university. I'm in a public study space during open hours. I haven't done anything wrong. Am I under arrest?" Anderson stepped closer. His hand moved to his duty belt where his handcuffs hung. "My tax dollars aren't training people like you to argue with me. Stand up. Now." Franklin's stomach dropped. Not because he was scared, because he recognized exactly what had just happened. Anderson had just said something racial, on camera, in a law library, to a law student studying the Fourth Amendment. "Let them incriminate themselves," Uncle Alton had said. Franklin stood slowly, hands visible, palms open. "I'm standing. I want to be clear for the record. I do not consent to being detained. I do not consent to any search. I am complying under protest." Anderson pulled Franklin's arms behind his back and handcuffed him. The metal bit into Franklin's wrists. Other students stared in silence. One student pulled out her phone and started recording. Anderson walked Franklin out of the library through the main entrance and toward his patrol car. Franklin said nothing else. He'd said everything that mattered. At 4:47 p.m., Franklin was booked at the campus police station on 2 charges, trespassing and disorderly conduct. The officer processing him asked if he had anyone to call. Franklin called his uncle. Alton Williams arrived at the station within 30 minutes. He was 58 years old, retired from the FBI after 27 years, and had investigated more civil rights cases than most attorneys would see in a lifetime. When he walked into the station and saw his nephew sitting in a holding cell in handcuffs, his expression didn't change. He just asked to speak with the supervising officer. The sergeant on duty explained that Franklin had been arrested for refusing to leave the library after being told he was trespassing. "Trespassing," Alton repeated, "in the Georgetown Law Library, where he's a second-year law student." The sergeant looked uncomfortable. That's what Officer Anderson reported. "I'd like to see the report," Alton said. The sergeant pulled it up on his computer. Alton read it in silence. The report stated that Franklin had been confrontational had refused to provide identification and had been acting suspiciously in the library. It made no mention of Franklin's calm explanation that he was a student. It made no mention of Anderson's statement about tax dollars. Alton looked at the sergeant. Officer Anderson's body camera was on during this encounter, correct? Yes, sir. I'll need a copy of that footage for my nephew's defense. We can provide it through discovery if charges are filed. Alton nodded. Charges won't be filed. This arrest will be dismissed within 2 weeks. But when we sue the university and Officer Anderson personally, I'll be requesting all body camera footage, all security camera footage, and Officer Anderson's entire disciplinary file. You might want to let your supervisors know. The sergeant said nothing. Franklin was released at 6:15 p.m. No bail was required for misdemeanor charges. He walked out of the station with his uncle and got into Alton's car. You did good, Alton said as they drove back toward campus. You stayed calm. You stated you didn't consent. You let him talk. That tax dollars comment, that's going to end his career. Franklin nodded. His wrists still hurt from the handcuffs. There's something else, Franklin said. My laptop was recording. I was using OBS to record my study session. The webcam caught everything. Alton glanced at him. Everything? From the moment he walked up to my table. And your laptop is still in the library? Franklin's eyes widened. Yeah. Oh no. Alton was already turning the car around. They got to the library at 6:40 p.m. Franklin's table was exactly as he'd left it. Book still open, laptop still there, backpack still on the chair. The library staff had assumed he'd stepped away and would be back. Franklin sat down, opened his laptop, and checked the OBS recording. It was still running. He stopped the recording. The file was 4 hours and 38 minutes long. He played it back. There he was, studying. Then Anderson walking up. The entire conversation. My tax dollars aren't training people like you. The handcuffs. Everything. Alton watched over his shoulder. Don't touch that file. Don't edit it. Don't move it. Copy it to a cloud backup right now. Then we're taking this laptop to a lawyer. The next morning, Franklin had an appointment with Professor Diana Santos. He'd sent her an email the night before. Need to discuss an incident with campus police. Can we meet? Santos had replied within 10 minutes. My office, 9 a.m. tomorrow. Professor Diana Santos was 51 years old and had been teaching civil rights law at Georgetown for 16 years. Before that, she'd spent 25 years as a practicing civil rights attorney, suing police departments, municipalities, and private institutions for discrimination and constitutional violations. She'd won $40 million in settlements over her career. And for the past 3 years, she'd been hearing the same name over and over from students who came to her office with complaints about campus police, Officer Sean Anderson. When Franklin walked into her office at 9 a.m. on Thursday, October 16th, and said, Professor Santos, I was arrested yesterday by Officer Anderson from campus police. She didn't ask what happened first. She said, You're the 8th student. Franklin stopped. What? Santos gestured for him to sit. You're the 8th student in 3 years to come to my office with a complaint about Officer Sean Anderson. All 8 of you are minorities. All 8 incidents happened in campus libraries, or study spaces. And all 8 of you were accused of trespassing, loitering, or suspicious activity while studying. Franklin felt the air leave his lungs. 8? Santos opened a file drawer and pulled out a thick folder. I've been documenting this for 3 years. I've reported it to campus police leadership 4 times. Every time, I'm told that Anderson is a good officer and that the complaints are unfounded. She laid the folder on her desk. Tell me what happened to you. Franklin told her everything, the unattended bag call, Anderson's approach, the confrontation, the tax dollars comment, the arrest. Then he pulled out his laptop. And I have it on video. Santos watched the OBS recording in silence. When it finished, she sat back in her chair. 3 cameras, she said. Your laptop, Anderson's body cam, and the library's security system. 3 angles of the same constitutional violation. She looked at Franklin. I'm taking your case, pro bono, and we're going to do more than just get your charges dropped. We're going to expose the pattern. We're going to find the other 7 students. And we're going to make sure Officer Anderson never wears a badge again. Franklin nodded. What do we do first? Santos smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been waiting 3 years for this moment. "First," she said, "we file a motion to dismiss your charges and demand all evidence, including body camera footage and library security footage. Then, we file a federal civil rights lawsuit. And then we find the other victims and we document every single case." The motion to dismiss was filed on October 18th, 2024. The Georgetown University Legal Counsel reviewed the body camera footage, the laptop recording, and the security camera footage. All three showed the same thing: a law student studying, being confronted without cause, and being arrested after an officer made a racially charged statement about tax dollars. The charges against Franklin Williams were dropped on October 23rd, 2024, 8 days after his arrest. But Professor Santos was just getting started. Using Georgetown's student record system and cross-referencing campus police incident reports, Santos identified 7 other students who had been stopped, questioned, or arrested by Officer Sean Anderson between April 2022 and October 2024. She reached out to each one. The 7 other students were Victim 1, April 2022, Aisha Johnson. Aisha was a 23-year-old black woman in her first year at Georgetown Law. On April 12, 2022, she was studying in a private study room in the law library, preparing for her contract's final exam. Anderson knocked on the door at 8:30 p.m. and told her the library was closing. Aisha explained that the library was open until midnight. Anderson told her she was loitering and needed to leave immediately. When Aisha asked to see his supervisor, Anderson told her, "You don't look like you belong here anyway." Aisha left to avoid confrontation. She filed a complaint the next day. Campus police reviewed it and concluded that Anderson had been enforcing library policy. The complaint was dismissed with a note that Anderson would receive counseling on communication. Aisha graduated in May 2024 and was now working at a civil rights nonprofit in Washington, D.C. Victim 2, September 2022. Carlos Mendoza. Carlos was a 25-year-old Latino male in his second year of medical school at Georgetown. On September 20th, 2022, he was studying anatomy in the medical library when Anderson approached him and asked for his student EID. Carlos showed it. Anderson examined it for a full minute, then asked Carlos to prove the ID was really his by answering questions about his date of birth and address. When Carlos asked why he was being questioned, Anderson said, "Medical students don't dress like that." Carlos was wearing jeans and a hoodie. Anderson eventually let Carlos go, but filed a report claiming Carlos had been uncooperative and suspicious. Carlos filed a complaint. It was dismissed. The reviewing officer noted that Anderson had been following protocol for verifying student IDs. Carlos was now a third-year medical resident at Johns Hopkins. Victim 3, January 2023, Priya Patel. Priya was a 24-year-old South Asian woman in her second year of law school. On January 15th, 2023, she was using a computer in the law library's computer lab to research case law for her legal writing assignment. Anderson walked up behind her and asked what she was doing. Priya, focused on her work, didn't hear him at first. Anderson raised his voice. "I asked you a question." Priya turned around, startled. Anderson demanded to know what she was working on and why she was accessing legal databases. Priya explained she was a law student doing research for class. Anderson told her he'd received a complaint about someone hacking into the library computers. Priya showed him her Georgetown Law login credentials on screen, proving she had authorized access. Anderson left without apologizing. Priya filed a complaint describing the interaction as racially motivated and intimidating. The complaint was dismissed. The reviewing officer noted that Anderson had been responding to a legitimate security concern. Priya graduated in May 2024 and was now clerking for a federal judge. Victim 4, June 2023, DeAndre Brooks. DeAndre was a 26-year-old black man in his third year of medical school. On June 8, 2023, he was studying in the medical school library's quiet study lounge when Anderson approached and told him the area was reserved for faculty only. DeAndre explained that the study lounge was open to all medical students and showed Anderson his student ID. Anderson looked at the ID and said, "I pay taxes that fund your scholarship." The least you can do is follow the rules. DeAndre didn't have a scholarship. He was paying full tuition with student loans. Anderson eventually left after another student confirmed the lounge was open to students. DeAndre filed a formal complaint describing Anderson's comment about scholarships as racist and presumptuous. The complaint was dismissed. The reviewing officer noted that Anderson had made an honest mistake about the room's usage policy. DeAndre was now completing his residency in emergency medicine. Victim 5, October 2023, Jasmine Carter. Jasmine was a 25-year-old black woman in her third year of law school. On October 3, 2023, she was studying in the main reading room of the law library when Anderson walked up and asked her to lower her voice. Jasmine had been studying silently, alone, for 2 hours. She politely told Anderson she hadn't been talking. Anderson insisted he'd heard her disrupting other students. Jasmine looked around. The nearest student was 15 feet away, wearing headphones, completely focused on their work. Anderson then said, "Affirmative action doesn't mean you can do whatever you want in here." Jasmine, stunned, asked Anderson to repeat what he'd said. Anderson told her to watch her tone and walked away. Jasmine filed a complaint the same day, quoting Anderson's affirmative action comment verbatim. The complaint was dismissed. The reviewing officer noted that Anderson denied making the comment and that there was no evidence to corroborate the allegation. Jasmine graduated in May 2024 and was now working as a public defender. Victim 6, February 2024, Marcus Chen. Marcus was a 23-year-old Asian American man in his first year of medical school. On February 14, 2024, he was studying in a private study room in the medical library when Anderson knocked on the door and asked to see his ID. Marcus showed it. Anderson looked at Marcus's name and asked, "Where are you really from?" Marcus, confused, said, "Virginia." Anderson clarified, "No, where's your family from?" Originally? Marcus explained his family had been in the United States for 3 generations. Anderson made a note in his patrol log and left. Marcus filed a complaint describing the interaction as inappropriate racial profiling. The complaint was dismissed. The reviewing officer noted that Anderson had been conducting routine student welfare checks. Marcus was currently in his second year of medical school. Victim 7, May 2024, Tiffany Rodriguez. Tiffany was a 24-year-old Latina woman in her second year of law school. On May 9, 2024, she was studying in the Law Library Cafe, a designated area where talking and eating were permitted. Anderson approached and told her she needed to leave because she was loitering. Tiffany, holding a coffee and surrounded by textbooks, explained she was a law student studying during the cafe's open hours. Anderson told her, "This isn't a social club for people like you. If you're not actively studying, you need to go." Tiffany was actively studying. Her books were open, her notes were visible. She filed a complaint. It was dismissed. The reviewing officer noted that Anderson had been enforcing library conduct policies. Tiffany was still at Georgetown Law, now in her third year. Victim 8, October 2024, Franklin Williams. And then there was Franklin. Professor Santos compiled all 8 cases into a detailed report. She presented it to Georgetown's legal counsel on October 25, 2024. The report showed 8 students over 3 years, all minorities, 5 black, 2 Latino, 1 Asian, all stopped in libraries or study spaces, all accused of loitering, trespassing, or suspicious activity. All had filed complaints, all complaints dismissed. 6 of the 8 had heard Anderson make racially charged comments. The legal counsel reviewed the report alongside the 3 videos of Franklin's arrest. By October 28th, the university had hired an external investigator to review Anderson's entire employment history. The investigation took 6 weeks. On December 10th, 2024, the investigator delivered a 47-page report concluding that Officer Sean Anderson had engaged in a pattern of racially biased policing, that campus police leadership had failed to investigate credible complaints, and that the university faced significant civil rights liability. On December 12, 2024, Sean Anderson was placed on administrative leave pending termination proceedings. On January 3, 2025, Professor Santos filed a federal civil rights lawsuit on behalf of Franklin Williams against Officer Sean Anderson and Georgetown University. The lawsuit alleged Fourth Amendment violations, racial profiling, and failure to supervise. The lawsuit demanded $5 million in damages. Georgetown's attorneys immediately filed a motion to dismiss, arguing Anderson's actions were within his discretion as a law enforcement officer. Professor Santos responded by filing a motion to add the 7 other students as plaintiffs and by requesting Anderson's complete personnel file. The federal judge assigned to the case, Judge Patricia Hernandez, reviewed the body camera footage, the laptop recording, and the security footage from Franklin's arrest. She also reviewed the investigator's report documenting the pattern. On February 14, 2025, Judge Hernandez denied Georgetown's motion to dismiss. In her written opinion, she stated, "The evidence suggests a sustained pattern of racially motivated stops that cannot be dismissed as isolated incidents or reasonable law enforcement activity." Discovery began immediately. Professor Santos subpoenaed every incident report Anderson had filed in his 11 years at Georgetown. She requested every complaint filed against him. She demanded body camera footage from every stop he'd conducted in the past 3 years. Georgetown's attorneys tried to argue the requests were overly broad. Judge Hernandez ordered the university to comply fully. By April 2025, Professor Santos had boxes of documents spread across her office. Franklin and a team of law student volunteers from Santos's civil rights clinic began reading through every report. They found the pattern everywhere. In 11 years, Anderson had filed 340 incident reports. Of those, 89 involved stops or detentions of students in campus libraries or study spaces. Of those 89 stops, 71 involved minority students, 80%. 18 involved white students, 20%. Georgetown's student body was 40% minority. If stops were random, the numbers should have been closer to 40-60, not 80-20. But the real evidence was in Anderson's own words. Across dozens of reports, certain phrases appeared over and over. Didn't look like they belonged, 14 times. Suspicious based on appearance, 9 times. Uncooperative attitude, 23 times, exclusively used for minority students. And then there were the statements witnesses had reported Anderson making during stops. "I pay taxes for this university. Affirmative action, scholarship students, people like you. Where are you really from?" Professor Santos compiled all of it into a supplemental brief filed on May 1st, 2025. The brief was 90 pages long and included statistical analysis, witness statements, and pattern documentation. Georgetown's legal counsel read it and knew immediately that the university could not win at trial. Settlement negotiations began on May 15th, 2025. Georgetown's opening offer was $500,000 to Franklin and $50,000 to each of the other 7 students, a total of $850,000. Professor Santos rejected it within an hour. "Your officer told my client that his tax dollars weren't training people like him," Santos wrote back. "On camera, in a law library, while arresting a law student for studying. This case will be shown in every civil rights class in America for the next 20 years. Your offer is insulting." Georgetown came back with $1.2 million to Franklin and $100,000 to each of the others. $1.9 million total. Santos rejected it again. On June 30th, 2025, depositions began. Anderson was deposed first. Professor Santos sat across from him in a conference room with a court reporter and 3 video cameras recording. Anderson's attorney sat beside him. Georgetown's legal counsel sat in the corner. Santos started with a simple question. "Officer Anderson, do you remember arresting Franklin Williams on October 15th, 2024? "Yes," Anderson said. "Do you remember telling Mr. Williams that your tax dollars weren't training people like him?" Anderson hesitated. "I don't recall saying that." Santos pulled out a laptop and played the body camera footage. Anderson's voice came through clearly. "My tax dollars aren't training people like you to argue with me." Santos paused the video. "Do you recall it now?" Anderson shifted in his seat. "I may have said something like that." "What did you mean by people like you?" Santos asked. Anderson's attorney interjected. "Objection. Calls for speculation." "This is a deposition, not a trial," Santos replied. "He can answer." The attorney nodded reluctantly. Anderson cleared his throat. I meant people who argue with police officers. You didn't mean black people? No. Santos pulled out a document. Officer Anderson, this is your incident report from April 2022 involving Aisha Johnson. You wrote that Ms. Johnson didn't look like she belonged in the law library. What did you mean by that? I meant she seemed out of place. Ms. Johnson was a first-year law student. She was studying in a law library. How was she out of place? Anderson didn't answer. Santos continued. In your report from June 2023 involving DeAndre Brooks, you told Mr. Brooks that you pay taxes that fund his scholarship. Why did you assume Mr. Brooks had a scholarship? I don't know. Mr. Brooks didn't have a scholarship. He was paying full tuition. Did you make the same assumption about white students you encountered? Anderson's attorney. Objection. Santos didn't wait for an answer. She moved to the next case. In October 2023, you told Jasmine Carter that affirmative action doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. What did you mean by that? I don't recall saying that. Santos pulled out Jasmine's written complaint, filed the same day. Ms. Carter filed a complaint quoting you verbatim. You're saying she fabricated it? I'm saying I don't recall. Santos leaned forward. Officer Anderson, over 3 years, you stopped 89 students in campus libraries. Of those 89 students, 71, that's 80%, were minorities. Georgetown's student body is 40% minority. Can you explain the statistical disparity? Anderson's attorney. Objection. That's not a fair characterization. Santos slid a statistical analysis across the table. This was prepared by a professor of statistics at Georgetown. It shows that the probability of your stops being racially random is less than 0.01%. You were 8 times more likely to stop a minority student than a white student in the same location. Can you explain that? Anderson stared at the paper. I stopped people who looked suspicious. And minority students looked more suspicious to you? That's not what I said. Then what made 71 minority students look suspicious while only 18 white students in the same locations did? Silence. The deposition continued for 6 hours. By the end, Anderson had invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination 14 times when asked about specific statements to students. In a civil case, invoking the Fifth allows a jury to draw an adverse inference, meaning they can assume the answer would have incriminated him. The next day, Professor Santos deposed the campus police chief who had dismissed all 8 complaints. Chief Robert Manning sat in the same chair Anderson had occupied. Santos asked him a simple question. Chief Manning, you reviewed 8 complaints against Officer Anderson between 2022 and 2024. All 8 alleged racially motivated stops. All 8 were dismissed. Why? Manning shifted uncomfortably. Each complaint was investigated individually. We didn't find sufficient evidence of misconduct. Santos pulled out the investigator's report. This independent investigation found a clear pattern of bias. Why didn't your internal reviews find the same pattern? We reviewed each case on its own merits. You didn't look for a pattern? Each incident was separate. Even when students were describing nearly identical experiences, being stopped in libraries, being told they didn't belong, being accused of loitering while studying, Manning didn't answer. Did you review body camera footage before dismissing the complaints? When available. Officer Anderson's body camera was active during most of these stops. Did you watch the footage? Manning hesitated. I reviewed summaries provided by supervisors. You didn't watch the actual footage yourself? Not in every case. Santos leaned back. So you dismissed 8 complaints of racial profiling without personally reviewing video evidence that could have corroborated the students' accounts? Manning's attorney. Objection. Argumentative. Santos moved on. After dismissing all 8 complaints, what steps did you take to address the pattern students were describing? We provided Officer Anderson with counseling on communication. Communication counseling for an officer who told students that tax dollars shouldn't train people like them and that affirmative action doesn't mean they can do whatever they want. That was your response? Manning said nothing. Chief Manning, are you aware that if you had taken these complaints seriously, Franklin Williams would never have been arrested? Manning's attorney. Objection. Santos didn't wait for an answer. No further questions. By August 2025, Georgetown's legal team knew they couldn't let this case go to trial. The depositions were devastating. The pattern was undeniable. And if a jury saw Anderson invoking the fifth 14 times, the verdict would be massive. On September 15, 2025, Georgetown's lead attorney called Professor Santos. "We'd like to discuss settlement," he said. The negotiations took 6 weeks. Georgetown offered $2.5 million to Franklin and $300,000 to each of the other 7 students, $4.6 million total. Santos countered $3.2 million to Franklin, $400,000 to $800,000 to each of the others, based on the severity of their encounters and mandatory reforms. Total package, $7.1 million. Georgetown's attorney balked. "That's more than we've ever paid in a civil rights settlement." "Then your officers should stop violating civil rights," Santos replied. Georgetown asked for time to consult with their insurance carrier. The carrier reviewed the case and informed Georgetown that they would not cover any settlement above $5 million, and that if the case went to trial and the verdict exceeded $10 million, the university would be on its own. On November 10, 2025, Georgetown agreed to settle. Final settlement terms: Franklin Williams, $3.2 million, Aisha Johnson, $800,000, Carlos Mendoza, $600,000, Priya Patel, $650,000, DeAndre Brooks, $750,000, higher due to the explicit tax/scholarship comment. Jasmine Carter, $700,000, higher due to the affirmative action comment. Marcus Chen, $500,000. Tiffany Rodriguez, $400,000. Total, $7.6 million. Additionally, Georgetown agreed to 1. Terminate Officer Sean Anderson immediately. 2. Accept the resignation of Chief Robert Manning. 3. Implement an independent civilian oversight board for campus police. 4. Require quarterly bias training, not annual, for all officers. 5. Mandate body camera review after every arrest. 6. Publish annual reports on campus police stops by race. 7. Create a student bill of rights for campus police interactions. 8. Fund a $500,000 scholarship program for students pursuing civil rights law. The settlement was finalized on December 15, 2025. Officer Sean Anderson was terminated effective December 16, 2025. He immediately appealed through the police union. The union grievance was denied. Anderson's law enforcement certification was revoked by the state of Maryland. His name was added to a national database of officers with credibility issues, meaning he could never testify in a criminal case and could never work in law enforcement again. Anderson applied for jobs in private security. Every background check revealed his termination for racial profiling. No company would hire him. As of March 2026, Sean Anderson is working in a warehouse, making $32,000 per year. He was earning $78,000 as a campus police officer. Chief Robert Manning resigned on December 20th, 2025. He did not receive a severance package. Franklin Williams graduated from Georgetown Law in May 2025, 1 month before the settlement was finalized. He passed the D.C. bar exam in July 2025. In September 2025, he and Professor Santos opened a civil rights law firm together, Williams and Santos Civil Rights Advocates. In their first 6 months, they've represented 12 clients in campus police misconduct cases. 8 have settled, 4 are pending. The 7 other students all received their settlements between December 2025 and February 2026. Aisha Johnson used her settlement to pay off her law school loans and start a nonprofit focused on police accountability. Carlos Mendoza used his to pay off medical school debt. Jasmine Carter started a legal defense fund for students facing campus police charges. Georgetown University implemented all required reforms by January 2026. The Civilian Oversight Board began operations on February 1st, 2026. In its first report, published in March 2026, the board reviewed 47 campus police stops. They found 0 instances of racial profiling and noted that body camera compliance had increased to 100%. Campus police stops of minority students dropped from 80% to 42%, closer to the actual demographic makeup of the student body. Student complaints about campus police dropped 73% in the first 3 months of the new oversight system. The case became a landmark example in civil rights law. It's now taught in law schools across the country as a case study in pattern evidence, Fourth Amendment violations, and the importance of documentation. Anderson's body camera footage, showing him telling Franklin, "My tax dollars aren't training people like you," has been viewed over 15 million times across news clips and educational platforms. Franklin's laptop recording, showing him calmly studying before Anderson's approach, is used in Know Your Rights workshops at universities nationwide. And the statistical analysis showing Anderson's 80-20 stop pattern is cited in academic papers on implicit bias in policing. The lesson wasn't just about one officer, it was about a system that dismissed 8 credible complaints, that rubber-stamped incident reports without reviewing evidence, that protected an officer who told students they didn't belong because of the color of their skin. And it was about what happens when victims document everything, when an attorney refuses to back down, and when 3 cameras capture the truth. Officer Sean Anderson bet that his badge would protect him, that students wouldn't fight back, that complaints would be dismissed like they always had been. He was wrong. If you believe students have the right to study without being racially profiled, share this story. What reforms do you think are needed to prevent campus police misconduct? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this reminded you that documentation, persistence, and good attorneys can hold power accountable, subscribe. We're not stopping until every student knows their rights and every officer knows that my tax dollars isn't a justification for violating the Constitution.